I'm really excited about the presentations today because, I feel over the years I've spoken quite a bit about academics and IEPs, and today's mission really is to prepare the children for adult life, for a happy and productive and independent adult life. And so the first presentation that I'm going to be talking about is really what to do with a younger child. And then the second one is going to look more at the specifics of the older child and how to apply for services in the adult community. So first of all, when we start planning for things with IEPs, we really have to understand the syndrome. And unfortunately, there's been rather limited research that has really talked about outcomes with children. There are anecdotal information that we know. We have a couple of studies that I'm going to talk about. But as far as really significant studies to really figure out what happens with adults with this syndrome, there's not a lot out there. If you do Google searches, you're not going to find quite a bit of information. What we do know, though, is that adaptive skill acquisition, in other words, acquiring the skills that children need to live independently as adults, oftentimes is limited. And it's limited even in the children that have higher IQs with this syndrome. So some of you may know from the research that you've done that there are approximately 30% of children that test within a cognitively disabled range, and about 70% that usually test in elementary school at a higher range than that, low average to average. But even with those children with higher IQs, their adaptive skill development is oftentimes delayed. We also know that quality of life can be compromised, that kids with this syndrome have a particular difficulty with making friends, with fitting in socially, and in a lot of ways they just are not as happy and well-adjusted in some respects as other children. So I wanted to take a look at a few of the key studies because I think they're important, especially in my job right now, working on behalf of the 22Q Family Foundation in advocacy and education, what people really need to understand. And then the last point I wanted to make on this slide, really the credit for this really goes to the Mind Institute and Tony, is the issue of anxiety and the role that plays in school performance and in adult outcomes. And I think he was really the instrumental spearhead person that really took a look at this issue with 22Q and came up with some really pertinent recommendations for this population. So thank you so much, Tony, for that pioneering work. And you as well, thank you. All right, so there are a couple key research studies that I wanted to pull out. And I gave these to you with the people that were involved so that you can take a look at these online and read the full synopsis of it. They are available in PDF form. You can just Google them and read the whole article. But this first, and we've got the researchers here in the audience, so I don't want to really speak to what they did, but the gist of it is that, as what I said, that we have to take a look at anxiety in the school setting because that impacts a child's ability to perform in the classroom and also into their ability with adaptive skills. So what was stated in the article is the presence of anxiety symptoms, but not intelligence levels, in children with 22q11 deletion syndrome is negatively correlated with adaptive function and impacts everyday living skills. So I think it's extremely important that school staff, when they're programming for children with the syndrome, really take a look at how to reduce anxiety and stress in the classroom. Another really pertinent research study that I'm going to talk more about in the second presentation, because this was done with adults, and it was done in Canada. It was a pioneering study. There's nothing else that's been replicated on it. But it took a look at 100 adults, 100 Canadian adults, and looked at their outcomes. 75% of the adults that were in this study scored in the functional deficient range with their adaptive skills. Although personal, vocational, and financial demographics confirmed widespread functional impairment, there were two areas that they did well at. One of them was their daily living skills. So in other words, just their ability to dress, to do sort of their functional skills, daily skills. And the second one was their work skills, their employment skills. So they turned out to be pretty good on the job. In other words, pretty good employees. And I think that's an important point, because given the right environment and the right training, oftentimes adults with this can hold a job. And oftentimes those jobs are part-time. I will say that sometimes full-time employment might be too stressful, but at least part-time employment is doable for many of the children and young adults with the syndrome. However, there were issues with social skills and communication skills. And those kinds of problems sort of impeded performance long-term and their integration into the community. So that study is worth reading. And again, I've got the information for you on the slide. The third study that I thought was pertinent was the one that was done on the quality of life for children with the syndrome. And it compared children with 22q11, or they called it velocardiofacial syndrome in this particular study, with chronically ill children and also typically developing children without a diagnosis of any kind. And this showed that the quality of life for children with the 22q11 deletion was poorer on several areas. They were poorer in their emotional well-being, in the social well-being, and in school functioning, but not on physical health. And I think probably many of you that have children with this would concur that the physical issues with this syndrome are not really the overriding things that impact the quality of life. It's more the social skills, the emotional skills, the communication issues, the school functioning. So education, and when we're talking about what the school should do, education should really address those dimensions of quality of life issues along with the academics. It's not just reading and math. It's all of these other prongs that make up these children that are going to impact their ability to move forward in everyday life. So I think those are key studies, and I think it's important for you to familiarize yourself with what those researchers have done. Now, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about some of the vocabulary here. What are we talking about when we talk about activities of daily living? The activities of daily living are eating with utensils, using the restroom, selecting the proper clothing, grooming, putting on clothes, bathing, walking and transferring, speaking, which can be a little bit more of a struggle for this syndrome. And these skills are taught at home and at school. And as your children are little with this syndrome, some of them may need OT, PT, and speech therapy in primary school or in preschool to master these activities of daily living. The reality for adults with this syndrome is most of them are doing fine with the vast majority of these issues. They are capable of dressing themselves, they are independent in these skills. Speaking can be a little bit more of a long-term problem with communication, but these activities of daily living are usually fine. There is a second layer, however, of daily living skills that are more problematic for this population. And those are called the instrumental activities of daily living. And that's where the 22q11 group has trouble. So when the study in Canada talked about activities of daily living, that was the strength, this is what they were talking about. Now, the school setting can test for this information, whether your child developmentally is progressing along a continuum that is putting them at age-appropriate levels. So there's one test, the Vineland Adaptive Scale is found in the schools. I put up here the domains that test looks at. And for those children that have higher IQs, schools would never give them this assessment. This is usually reserved for children that have a cognitive disability, in other words, an IQ of 70 or below. Children that are more at the average to above average or average to low average range, typically they would not do this test. So, but in this population, that test is a necessity. So this is kind of where, we've got to understand the differences with this syndrome compared to what other syndromes or how other children develop. So Vineland Adaptive Scales. Another scale some schools may use is the Adaptive Behavior Assessment System. Basically, it goes through the same domains. It's just another tool that they could use to assess whether or not a child is progressing correctly or at developmentally appropriate levels. So we move into a school setting. So first of all, as I said, adaptive tests are not usually done for kids that have higher IQs than general education settings. So that's number one. Eligibility for cognitive impairment for IQs, to get a cognitively impaired designation in the school setting requires two prongs. It requires an IQ of below 70 and also requires adaptive skill levels that are impaired in two environments, in a home environment, or more than one environment, home environment and school environment. So sometimes this idea that kids with this syndrome need this programming of functional skills in the IEP is oftentimes overlooked in the school setting. It's not done. However, it's something that's definitely needed. I meant looking at the studies that have been done and the adult outcomes and the fact that the functional skills don't just develop on their own over time, it's definitely something that needs direct intervention. The staff typically does not understand the long-term implications of the syndrome. They don't understand what the needs are. So proactive interventions are the key here. We need to involve the school staff. We need to educate the staff at school. The IDEA law requires that a school service children in both academic, developmental, and functional areas. So that is right in the IDEA law. That's part of what the school's responsibility is. Their responsibility is more than just academics. It's also making sure that the child moves to young adulthood with the skills that they need to work in society, to have their own apartment, to navigate the environment, all of those things that are important. So how do we start with this? Well, first of all, we need to get the school staff to do the proper evaluations. They have to recognize the long-term issues that are associated with the syndrome. We have to address anxiety in the school setting, and we have to put goals in the IEP that help children lead a less stressful educational path than they might have otherwise. We have to set IEP goals that are not just academic. We need to put goals in the IEP that are more functional, that are leading to the ability of the child to live on their own. PT, OT, and speech and language therapy are really key to long-term independence and should not only address just school issues. I can't tell you how many times I have been at IEP meetings with families, and I do this, by the way, virtually, so I don't have to actually come to your meeting. I can be attending your meeting via Skype or go to meeting or over the phone. And one of the things that I've argued quite a bit with is the OT therapist who says that the child can write so they don't need OT therapy anymore because all they need to do is be able to handle the pencil and make the letters, and they're fine in a school environment. And of course, I'm looking at functional skills and the OT's responsibility to take a look at issues like visual perceptual skills, which are often low in this syndrome, as well as the adaptive skills, which should be looked at. So it's getting the districts to recognize the need of the OT therapists to really expand how they're thinking about their services in a school environment. And I think the reality for parents is that you may actually need to search out community resources to help you with some of this. That the school system, being that it's 2016, money is tight, you may need to access your health benefits, and I'm sure that Mind Institute, local hospitals may be able to help you figure out a way to be able to pay for or get access to therapy outside of the school. But school districts are required to do this. So in the IEP, speech and language therapy, occupational therapy, and physical therapy are all under the guises of what they call related services. And speech and language therapy in this particular syndrome usually starts out with articulation issues, just the ability to speak and the ability to make the sounds and to form the words and to give enough detail. But it does not end when the articulation is fixed with surgery and with enough speech therapy. This continues on for years with pragmatic language, with expressive language, with social language, with being able to advocate for yourself. These are problems that plague children with this syndrome to adulthood. So I would be very, very cautious if a school district is just testing for articulation and saying, your child is cured, they don't need speech therapy anymore, because in fact they have to be looked at in all these other areas which we know are problematic with this syndrome. Again, occupational therapy, it's not just handwriting and motor skill, it's also issues of visual perceptual skill deficits, and there are classroom accommodations that can be done there, and there are activities of daily living that the OT therapist can frankly help the kids with in the elementary school. I also think that we really haven't paid that much attention in the literature on gross motor issues with this syndrome, and I think some of it's subtle, but there are some balance issues, there is hypotonia, kids get tired, their core strength is not what it should be, and some of that does lend itself to kind of fatigue in the school setting. Kids get tired, and that can impact their ability to access their education as well. So here are all related services to the IEP that we would be looking at adding for the syndrome. For academic skills, I can't tell you how many IEPs I've looked at, and probably about 1,000 by now, where they'll have one skill in mathematics and it's only addition. And that's it. That's the skill. And we have iPhones that can do addition. Why spend all the time and resources for the special education support on doing something that my phone can do? Because everybody has got their nose in a phone. This whole society is looking at their telephone. So, I'm always looking at the areas that are deficient. And again, I'm going to give a shout out to Mind Institute for their research in mathematics and all the groundbreaking work they've done at looking at where the areas of deficit are. There are in temporal issues. It's in issues like time and magnitude, counting coins, understanding budgeting, exactly what Tony was talking about with understanding what numbers stand for. And it takes advocacy to get those kinds of goals into the IEP. That is what should be in the IEP under mathematics. It's not just things that can be easily fixed with the calculator. So in the IEP, we want to focus in on functional skills. We want to look at reading for information, the comprehension. We want to be able to use the internet to research pertinent information, be able to use the tools available. We want to make sure the children can count money, that they understand what it means to be 50% reduced, in a store, how to go shopping, whether or not somebody is taking them because they're charging them more than they should for an item. Understanding time, very confusing for kids with this syndrome. What are the months of the year? What are the days of the week? If I say it's 2 weeks from now, what does that mean? How much time is it going to take you to get from my classroom to the cafeteria? How much time will it take you to complete an assignment? That whole concept of time can be very fuzzy. Using math around the home and in the community in functional skill sets. Writing well enough to complete forms, being able to read forms, being able to say their address, their phone number, answering pertinent questions. And then I think what's important is just basic general knowledge of the world, especially community knowledge of their life around them. What does the government do? What are the prongs of government? If I was in trouble, who would I call? Functional things that they are going to need. Always that goal is, I want my child out of my house and on their own, and I want them happy and I want them safe. So what kinds of things do we need to get into their little heads that are going to help to that end? So families, what can you do? I know families with 22 cute children are so dedicated to their kids. They really, really want the best. I can't tell you how much it's heartwarming to think about how hard families work to make sure that their children are finding success. So I didn't know this. I don't know if you know that I have an older child with this syndrome. Some of you may not know a little bit about my history. My son is 33 years old right now. He's married. I have a little 2-year-old granddaughter through him that is adorable. She does not have the syndrome. She's functioning and doing very well. But when he was young, I didn't really understand any of this about adaptive skills. And we were in a hurry to get to soccer. It was much easier for me as a parent to do things for him. Let me get the stuff out of your backpack. Let me organize this for you. We've got to get here. We've got to get there. I'll take over. Helicopter mom. Let me do this. The food's in the kitchen. I'll go cook it. He was watching a program on the TV or doing something in the other room, playing with his brother. I didn't get the importance of getting him involved in every single aspect of independent living around my house. I didn't know. But the beauty of this is I'm telling you, so you guys know, that it's role-playing for your children, modeling for your kids. There's a technique called backwards chaining that is a good technique for you to use, where if you're trying to teach your child a skill, do all parts of the skill and then let your child do the last step. And then the next time you would do maybe the first 4 steps of it, and he does the last 2 steps. Until you teach him so that he's finishing, and he gets the reinforcement all the time of finishing something successfully. So he's always the last one that does it, and he gets it done. So it's a way to introduce a harder skill for him that he can accomplish. And of course, the goal is for him to be able to eventually do that whole thing independently. So cooking, using the washer and dryer, setting the table, helping you with grocery shopping. The other thing that's really helpful, I think, is if you talk out loud as you're doing things. You don't really think about doing this. It's kind of unusual. We don't really talk out loud. We aren't sharing what's inside our heads. But children with this syndrome have a very difficult time with something called theory of mind, understanding other people's way of thinking and understanding how people connect. So as you're thinking about things, if you speak out loud about what you're thinking, it helps them understand. So I can give you sort of an example. Let's say you had dinner plans with some friends and you spend some time cooking and you had a meal prepared and your friend calls you and says, I'm too sick to come, I can't come, sorry, I really apologize. You could hang the phone up and not say anything about it. Or you might say to your child with 22q, you know, Mom's feeling kind of bad right now because I had planned this whole dinner. I was looking forward to seeing them, but you know, they called and they said that somebody was sick. But you know what, I do understand it. You know, I know they would have come if they could have, so I'm kind of disappointed and I'm kind of upset, but I understand it. So you're giving your child that extra layer of education. You're helping them understand how you're processing and thinking about the world. So that's another thing that you can do for them as kind of a gift at home. Speaking out loud, talking about what you're doing, it will improve their language as well, to hear that. It's not something that you commonly do. I mean, it's not really how we live, but it's good practice for children that don't really get this. Structure your household, create a schedule, and keep to the schedule. Children with this syndrome do not do well with transitions. Posting a schedule, having it on a board somewhere where they know that, you know, homework is during this time, you know, keep them on target and help them deal with structure. Allow mistakes and choices. You know, it's probably better if they make some of these mistakes in elementary school than later on in life. So allow them not to have their homework. They forgot it. You know, you have a method, you have a system in place. And believe me, when I was at that age level, you know, as a parent, I was making sure the backpack was packed and, you know, did you forget this? And, you know, running around. But in retrospect, I think I did a disservice because he needs to get independent. You know, he needs to learn those things. So you might put a reminder up there or a system in the house to help organize him or her, but, you know, constantly doing everything for them doesn't really help them gain the independence. Explain your emotions and your feelings. If you're feeling happy, sad, because again, with this syndrome, 22q11 and emotions, it doesn't go very well. You know, kids with this syndrome don't read facial cues very well, so explaining that is really important. I know this is hard to say, I get it, but try to resist overscheduling because you don't have time for them to sit down and really, you know, get their shoes on and get their coat on and do all this stuff if you're in a rush to get out the door all the time. So I know that's hard, but you know, that's the kind of lives that people live today. Try to resist that if you can. And if you're having a lot of outbursts and behavioral issues, it really helps, I think, to set up a behavioral reward system. You know, there's a lot of ways to do that. I'm not going to go through that right now, but there are a lot of ways that you can set up reward systems at home in a very positive way to help try to get their behavior correct. Okay, I'm going to give you a couple resources because I always, when I do my talks, I want to be as helpful to you as I possibly can. So here's a couple of my favorite resources. This is something I've talked about a long time. This is an adaptive skills booklet. It is produced by the Texas School for the Blind. Now, you would never really think to look on their website for a resource. But what this is from ages 2 to 21, and it is a checklist of all of their adaptive skills. In other words, it talks about things like social competence, interactions, self-concept, emotions, values, sexuality, self-care, time, money, and you can just look at the skills and what your child is supposed to do at what age level and check it off when they've accomplished those skills. So it gives you a template. It's not something that's so nebulous, like what are these adaptive skills that I have to do here? It gives you a perfect checklist. It is 148 pages long. So this is not like a one-page document. It's very comprehensive. It costs you $15. So to me, that's money well spent for this population to have that all outlined for you. And you can get this on their website. I put the website up here for you. If your child is having trouble with social issues, there are things at school. Carol Gray, she's very well known. I don't know some of you that have gone back in time with us through this journey of VCFS. She came to one of our conferences. I don't recall which one. I think it was Troy, Michigan, possibly. She did a presentation for us. She is kind of a guru in social stories. She's well respected by schools. There's books online. You can certainly get some of her resources. Writing a social story in her world is very specific. It's not just, let's just write a story about, how to get along with other children. There are specific components to the social story, and it's done in particular ways. There's 10 different defining aspects. It's a little bit more complicated than let's just write a nice story and talk to our kids about it. But I would encourage you to talk to your school staff maybe about incorporating this. Many schools do use Carol Gray. Another good resource, Michelle Garcia-Winner. She does a lot on social thinking, and that is, again, another way of thinking about social self-awareness, perspective taking, theory of mind, regulating self. She talks a lot about expected behavior and unexpected behavior. And these resources are, again, available. There are books online. It's not really a big investment. And again, school staff can program. They can have school groups that do this type of therapy in the school setting. So they're talking about these and working with your child. And this can be written into the IEP. So Michelle Garcia-Winner. Another resource that I want to talk about is a program called Vasavi. This was developed by a team of researchers in Switzerland, Bronwyn Glasser, Stefan Elias, and their team. They are long-time researchers in the 22q11 deletion syndrome. They are highly respected. They've published many, many papers. They know this population very well. And this particular program was tested on children that have this syndrome. I actually did the English version. It was first done in French, and then I did the English. I helped them with the English version, so I'm very familiar with this because I did the whole program myself. It's kind of lengthy, but it does get into reading facial expressions, understanding what a happy face looks like, a sad face looks like. It also is on working memory. There's some memory components on this. It's engaging, and there are 48 computer sessions. It's research-based. It's ages 7 to 16 is what they say on their website. I think 7 might be a little young. I would say maybe 8 or 9 to 16. But again, this is a way to help your child understand that kind of facial emotion. For anxiety, there is a program called Camp Coppola. This program, again, has been a program that has been around a while. Again, the school counselor can work with your child using this program. It is 12 sessions. There are a couple different aspects to the program, and it is a program that helps your child cope with anxiety and understand what's happening and how to react to it in a positive way. And then I know Tony talked about his video game, and I think, again, this is another resource that's coming out that is going to be very helpful to take a look at deficits in number concepts, time, and arithmetic. Playing a video game, I meant what could be more fun, so this is another resource, and I think Tony would be able to speak to it much better than I can, but again, that is a wonderful resource for us to have as a community that is going to start targeting some of these issues. So I think in closing, I would say just dream big and set outcome goals, set realistic expectations for the kids, focus on the whole child in this IEP, not just the academics, try not to overschedule, advocate for functional support in the schools, and recognize that this syndrome is complex and it's really going to require specialized support throughout the lifespan. Assistance is available. We're available through the 22Q11 Family Foundation. The Mind Institute is available to support you. I do have a book. I don't know, most of you had the book here today, but for those of you that don't know, there is a book available on educating children, of which Tony has a chapter in there with me. He's been a big supporter of the efforts in education, and I have to say, a lot of what drives what I do in the schools really is very firmly based in the research that's been done at the Mind Institute. So I have a huge amount of respect for what you guys have done.
Thank you. That was amazing as usual. We have a son he's 14, has anxiety. And so I think one of the struggles for us is as we're trying to make him independent, balancing out the anxiety that he will experience when whatever it may be. It could be something very simple. And so I think that's a struggle for me always, is that I don't know what he's going to go through as far as anxiety.
I think, the anxiety can be treated. So I think that's one thing that is important for families to seek out treatment for anxiety with their medical professionals. I do have a lot of families who have a diagnosis, either there's a test done at school and they're ranked high or at risk or significant. And I always encourage the families to seek out treatment for that. There could be relaxation exercises, there could be biofeedback, there's medications. I mean, I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to be recommending, anything at this forum here, but I think it's important to look medically for the treatment, but also within the school setting, there are a lot of things that we can do to reduce anxiety at school. Number one is matching the right environment with the child. Sometimes there's really a mismatch, and there's much too much expected of the child, or that the environment is not conducive to how that child learns. With this syndrome, there are specific areas that are impaired. I mean, I've looked at probably thousands of neuropsych tests over the years with this syndrome, and there's a lot of similarities between children. Now, there's variability, but I often see processing speed is impaired, working memory is impaired. Those two things in combination in a large setting make it very difficult for a child to attend and really keep pace in a classroom. So, if there's a mismatch between the expectations, that can be very stressful on a child. They're looking around, why don't I get this? Why is everybody else starting on their work? I don't know what to do. Well, we can program for that at school. We can add in things to the IEP that are going to help that. We can have notes given. We can have an extra person in the classroom to go over and do some one-on-one help with that child before they have to start their work. There are ways to reduce stress by changing expectations, by allowing kids to retake tests, there's just a list. I did a webinar for Dempster, I think, on anxiety. You know, what are some things that we can do in the classroom? And there's a whole list of things. So I think it's a recognition that it's an issue, number one. I think number two, it's because we know that it impacts these kids by the studies that have been done. So we need to treat it. We can't just ignore it and think it's going to go away.
I'll just make a quick comment, because that's exactly the captures the spirit of what we understand here. And I'm also not a doctor, but we know that anxiety is not just like a virus. You don't just get anxiety. And for us, the understanding is that mismatch that Donna spoke about is really driving a lot of it. So it's what are you capable of doing compared to what is being expected of you? And that, when that mismatch is too big, then it makes people very anxious. So we talk a lot here about bringing the child closer to the demands of the world and the demands of the world close to the abilities of the child. So you can do things within the child to improve their capabilities and sometimes do direct treatment of anxiety, but also adjusting the expectations so that the gap is not too big. And then we see kids really turning from what we've called strugglers back into copers, and they're moving along at a really good rate. And so it's just this constant calibration. It's a lot of hard work, but it's tractable. Thankfully, it doesn't involve stem cells or brain surgery. It just involves a lot of analysis and constant tweaking.
Hi, Donna.
Hi.
My question is, you made a comment about on IEPs, don't just focus on the academics, focus on the whole. My understanding and the experience I have with my daughter, who's now 27, they don't want to focus on anything but the academics. How, as a parent, can you get past that and have them do what is required of them?
I can do it.
But you can't be at every one of our IEPs.
Well, you know, I think if it's an issue, you know, if you're having trouble with the school, you know, sometimes getting a person in outside to advocate on behalf of your child is a powerful thing to do. And they are required by law. I mean, the IDEA law is very clear. It's academics, behavioral, and functional. And with this syndrome, there's enough research, because they can say, well, we don't do this for most kids, but this syndrome requires that they add those prongs to the IEP. They have to do it. Now, I think they can be convinced. I think it can be done in a way that is not super expensive to the staff. There can be little things that are added into the IEP that could make your life a lot easier. But I very rarely have had a district, when I've gotten involved and we've really looked at the complexity of the syndrome and that kind of thing, that they've said, no, we don't do social skills. Because I can be quite honest, I can tell them, look, you know, I did 57 school districts last year that I was in. This is what's being done around the country for this syndrome. So this is what is necessary. So
the experience, the words that were given to me when I pulled my daughter out at fifth grade to homeschool. We had moved, so the first year I wanted her to be in regular school to meet friends, to make friends. Mm-hmm. And so when I pulled her out to homeschool, I still kept the traditional school for her resource, for her IEP. And when they knew I pulled her out, they said, since we're only going to see you 2 days a week, let's work on her specific area of need. Well, isn't that what an IEP is? Wasn't that what they were supposed to be doing all along? So it was frustrating. So
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know about your particular situation, but I think for the general audience here, really the schools need to prepare the whole child for independent life. So.
Hi, I have a question. My son is 16 and in special ed, and the small school district he's in, there's two separate, high functioning and low functioning, but he's mid functioning. And he doesn't fit in either class. And we had to fight, and he's spending part of his day now with both classes, but he doesn't seem to be learning anything in either. What should
So
we
you're
do?
kind of caught in the middle. And I think your story is not that uncommon with this syndrome. Many children with 22q are not severely impaired by way of, you know, where we talk about severe or profound intellectual disability. But many of them hover between the borderline, kind of low functioning, and then they have a lot of other problems on top of it. So it does become a mismatch oftentimes. They don't really fit into the classroom of kids that have more severe problems because it's just not the peer group that they've been with through elementary school. The regular education classes are too hard. They can't make it in those classes. So sometimes it's really, working with the district to put together a very unique program. And I've done that on multiple occasions. We've made changes, we've made modifications to the expectations in the regular classroom, we pulled support into the regular classroom, we've pulled the child out for targeted instruction in certain classes, we've looked at the high school course offerings and tried to get them into independent life skills classes like economics or financing or cooking, we used to call it home economics years ago. We tried to match what the school was offering with what, we thought was needed for a strong transition plan. And then we tried to emphasize the world of work. And I'm not going to say a lot about this now because my second talk is targeted to your question, really. But I do think it is a programming nightmare a lot of times for families dealing with this syndrome because it is not the typical school model.
With my son, they were just putting him in whatever class was open. And last year, the school counselor said, what does it matter? He's not graduating anyways.
Oh, wonderful. It does matter to you, and it matters to your child. So, yeah.
So we understand from having been to meetings for years like this and having worked with Donna that there are school districts that will go out of their way to help kids, and there are other ones that you're born into an adversarial relationship. When he was 6 years old, our son was taken off of his IEP after the evaluation. They said he does not qualify for any services, and we said, but he's going to fail without support. We had to go through years of failure before we could get him back in there, and we had that adversarial relationship. Our son is 15 and right exactly in the middle as you're talking about right now. So I'm glad to hear that Donna's going to be talking about this, and I loved your talk because, as we've talked about before, I open every IEP meeting telling the team that we have 2 goals for his IEP. Number 1 is to try to get him, everything in the IEP should be oriented toward making him the most capable individual and being able to live as independently as possible for him. Everything in that IEP needs to be aimed toward that. If there's something in there that isn't aimed toward that, then the resources are being wasted. The other thing is we need to do everything we can to reduce the amount of anxiety that he experiences in school, because any anxiety is not only bad for his mental health, but it's bad for performance. In terms of the adversarial relationships, getting someone involved, we had the ability and the resources to be able to hire Donna as a consultant and be able to have her in one of our meetings via Skype. Actually, we did that 2 or 3 times. And the relationship changed when we brought in an outside authority. Now, Donna, you are a unique resource, and we wish that we could clone you. Since we can't, are there other ideas that we could do to be developing other resources, like parent advocates that could go in and talk with other parents, somebody else in the room with you?
And this is the mission of the 22Q Family Foundation. This is our mission. So the question of cloning, yes, I'm happy to train other people. Not clone me, but, I realize that I have information to share. I have things that I do, a model that I do that is successful. And the goal would be, the goals that we've talked about is to, train more advocates. I would mentor more advocates. This is all things that are, what the mission of this is. So, hopefully we'll do the fundraising. I mean, Dempster Foundation did donate some, but it's not, unlimited funds. So we hope to build this. We hope to do it. And I'm 100% committed to this community. I mean, I've been involved with this since 1994 when my child was diagnosed with this. And I'm 100% committed for as long as I possibly can. So I hope that we can grow this, make it more, widespread, have more information in the schools, have more people being advocates, do the training, be able to come to the table. And I'm hoping that by lending my name, and then I realize I have a name, I have a book, I have a name, but I can lend that name to other people coming in where I'm overseeing them as an advocate. They can, in other words, work with me. So it's all things that are hopes and dreams for us, where we say where are our goals in the future. That's what we'd like to do.
On the topic of LEND, our LEND grant here, which is, as I said again, the Leadership in Education Neurodevelopmental Disorders, this is one of the things we hope will come out of it, because it's training not just clinicians, but other kinds of professionals as well, and so we're going to try to get as wide as possible. On this session, we also had, as you can see in your program, a parent panel, and I'd asked our three great parents and organizers to be part of this when they had a response, so Brandy wanted.
So I wanted to speak to Donna's note about mismatched learning environments. Our daughter is 15 and a half. She was early identified as being delayed developmentally, but was not diagnosed with 22q11.2 deletion syndrome until she was 13 and a half. So it's barely been 2 years. So we navigated special education without the benefit of an actual diagnosis for many, many years. And prior to having the diagnosis, we did come to the realization that a traditional school was not going to meet her needs. And she has been attending public charter schools, smaller public charter schools, that do their own special education or have a really strong, dedicated special education team. And we found that in Montessori, and now she attends a public Waldorf charter school here in Sacramento. It's about 360 kids. It looks and feels like a real high school, but obviously with 360 kids, that's a much smaller environment. There's typical kids, there's quirky kids, and it's perfect for our child who's really creative, can draw, but having that setting and that realization in yourself as a parent, I think, is one of the bigger aha moments. Donna talks about having the calculator on your phone, and that was something that we were saying back in 3rd grade. Can we please stop remediating mental math and show her how to use a calculator so that we can have her participate in the classroom? So she's always been included, not without challenges, but she's on track to graduate and is getting all A's except for math, which she would really like to get an A in, but it's high school math, and we've told her we would like you to try the best that you can, and that's all we can hope for, as long as you have the support that you can get as part of that. So I just wanted to share the mismatch. The diagnosis is helpful, but often many of us are still traveling that path without that information and still having to come to the same conclusions.
Reducing mismatch is probably the one motto one wants to keep in mind all the time.
Hello, I'm Rosemary. My son is 2.5 and was diagnosed with 22q, and we've been really lucky to have an excellent early intervention team and also a daycare provider that has teachers that are very sensitive to his developmental challenges. One thing that we came up against that you sort of touched on was the inclusion of OT and what that really means. So we came to the 22q clinic here, and it was recommended that our son engage in OT primarily because of sensory and fatigability issues, not so much actual fine motor problems. And when we brought this up with our early intervention team and our case manager, they really wanted to find a fine motor problem in order to include OT. And I think they listened to us and they understood that what we were saying was, well, we're concerned about some social emotional issues and about sensory problems. And I think we ended up getting it, but they kind of stretched on the evaluation to say that he had some issues with writing that I'm pretty sure he doesn't have. And so, going forward, he's going to turn 3 pretty soon, and the school district is going to take over. It's going to become an IEP and not an IFSP. And we are concerned that they're not going to qualify him for those types of services. So I don't know if you have any recommendations for how to...
I think you have to bring in the research that's been done and the information that we have in the adaptive domains. Take a look at developmentally, is he able to do the things that he's supposed to do, and kind of go from there with them. And when he's older, there are some tests. He's still pretty young. Really young children are a little more difficult to test because, they're not interested necessarily in doing the tests. And, you have to look at how they're moving through the environment. It has to be more than just the formal testing. But these tests can be replicated several times throughout the lifespan and certainly through the schooling lifespan. And I recommend that they do that because even though, he may be okay now, these things can crop up as problems later on as well. So, I would work closely with them. If you want to talk to me, I'd be happy to talk with you about it personally. So,
we have a 4-year-old daughter who will be starting kindergarten in the fall, and she's never qualified for any services. So I'm wondering how we start that without having a big delay between the beginning of the school year and when she might actually qualify for an IEP.
Has she been tested?
She was tested through Regional Center and did not qualify for any services, and she had a short speech eval through the school district when she turned 3 and did not qualify at that time.
Okay, so I think I might approach the school, give them literature on what the diagnosis is, say that your child has this diagnosis and you want a thorough evaluation done. And, we can help you with what kinds of tests to do for a thorough evaluation for this particular syndrome and see if they can't do, a more thorough determination. It's called the eligibility determination meeting. And, sometimes they do a very cursory job. They might just look at academics. Well, as you know, with 22Q, it's not just academics. There's a whole host of issues here. So we would want to make sure that they're on target for all of these different skills. If they are, great. You could observe how they're doing in kindergarten, take data. I always tell parents, collect data, collect, because when you have it documented, it's easier to go back into the school and say, they're not understanding this. They brought homework home 15 days in the last 2 or 3 weeks and they don't understand any of it, what's going on, keep track of it. But most kids with this syndrome qualify at some point. The problems that they encounter sometimes don't show up as strongly until about the end of 2nd, 3rd grade. And then there's more of a mismatch between what they can do and what they're doing what the school's expecting. So I would ask for more testing.